through this world without too much pain, because pain is the energy that they're also extracting from you. It's apparent every time you pick up the news or you watch the news on TV. Your fear and suffering is feeding the news corporations. Your loathing, your terror, your anticipation, your paranoia, they're eating you alive. I want to talk about something here that will probably blow people's minds, but I said I'd never say this publicly, but you're going to get, because at some reason, because things are strange at the moment, I'm going to go public with this. Now, I'm not going to say unnecessarily believe this. It's just one more thing I want to throw out there, okay? So this is not a theory, this is not a hypothesis, this is me just blowing smoke rings out my ass, and as if we were having a chat. It's what if, okay? We have people do historical what if. This is Energy Wars what if. Let's talk about 9/11 on that live TV broadcast, okay? There is a phenomena that Carl Jung identified called catalytic exteriorization phenomena, where someone can be so upset that they can smash something, an object around them. I've seen this happen myself, where a member of my family, when they were a teenager, was very, very upset, and a glass on the table exploded into him. Like, when I say exploded, it literally atomized. It almost went back to sand. And that was, he lost his temper. I've heard lots of stories of people, this happening, and light bulbs exploding. Carl, the idea of catalytic exteriorization phenomena, when he was upset about going to college and a knife in a drawer shattered into several pieces, like shattered like glass. Another time he was arguing with Sigmund Freud, and a bookshelf nearly fell on top of Freud. That began an enormous crack in it. Another time a table snapped in two. An enormous amount of energy is released from the diaphragm area of the body. And this is what most likely was what the poltergeist activity is. You think of most poltergeist experiences are teenage girls going through, very young teenage girls going through puberty. You think of all the forces at work inside a young girl's body as she's going through puberty. Remember, she's going from a little girl to this incredible energy machine that has to create new human life. And the forces in there are incredible, and that's why in most poltergeist cases, there's a teenage girl in the house and there's no father or strong male figure nearby. And that energy is being released out of her and moving objects around. Poltergeists are real. It's been confirmed. I know many people have seen them. It's one of those things the materialistics don't like to talk about. But it's all ultimately this ability to get the energy out of us and into the material world as a phenomena that we can't control. You think of 9/11, 2001, and you had probably hundreds of millions of people focusing their intense psychic energy on the TV, watching people jumping out of the Twin Towers. I missed all this because I was actually working in a basement, believe it or not, the day it happened. But everyone else seemed to watch it live on TV. That's why when I came out of work, I looked at the faces on the people walking around Dublin, and they were literally in a state of shock. Their eyes wide opened. But you imagine hundreds of millions of people watching this live on TV. And then people wonder why the towers literally turned to dust. You can talk about directed energy weapons, you can talk about nanothermite, but what if the directed energy was the subconscious psychic energy of hundreds of millions of people trying to stop people from jumping off the buildings to their death? And they somehow, unknowingly, through an enormous maelstrom, global mainstream of catalytic exteriorization phenomena, turned the Twin Towers to dust. Just throwing that out there. Just one more mix in the pot. I'm not nailing my colours to that mast. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just saying that, look at those. I do believe that there's something to the directed energy idea of those towers exploding, because they blow in such a way that doesn't look like an explosion. I don't know why people say it looks like, but it doesn't look like that at all. It doesn't look like a controlled explosion. It looks like they're literally dissolving in space-time. And I've yet to see proof that the elites have, they're up there in Saturn in their cube, apparently, with these directed energy. I've never seen any proof of that, but there's plenty of proof of catalytic exteriorization phenomena. Plenty of proof of it. So just throwing that out there. Of course, people will quote me saying this is what I believe about it. I don't believe about it. It's just, like I said, blowing smoke rings out my ass about another possible idea that you could think about. Anyway, regarding energy, now, I posted that video of James Joyce and the snowflakes, and I also put another video up on that on my YouTube channel, Thomas Sheridan. It's called The Magus from Monto, James Joyce. James Joyce, like so many of the great literary people, had Jesuit educations. In Jesuit educations, James Joyce entered Ireland's top Jesuit college for boys, Clongowne Woods, in County Kildare, when he was 6.5 years old. He was that much of a prodigy. He was 6.5 years old, and he was studying the Greek classics. He was studying philosophy at 6.5. He ended Trinity College University when he was 16. He received an education that was like Jesuit plus. And that's why in all his books are essentially autobiographic. In the book Ulysses, Buck Mulligan, who was based on a real character called Oliver St. John Grogarty, an Irish nationalist and doctor, states to the young James Joyce, who appears in the book as a character called Daedalus, that you have a darkness about you that even a Jesuit education can't account for. Because in the Jesuit world, they get when you're at the level that he was at as a child and brought in at the age he was at, he was given the, shall we say, the secrets that the rest of us are looking for. And if you that's why I'm saying, get away from all these conspiracy books and stop watching Katy Perry videos and looking for all-seeing eyes and all that nonsense, and start getting yourself a proper education and watch documentaries like the Magus from Monto, and you will see that they're giving us the real stuff in a different way. Tolstoy was doing this also. So was John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck was teaching us about the psychopaths long before anyone else. In Ulysses, Joyce, and in the documentary I'm talking about, Joyce talks about the passage, or we're brought through the passage of Nighttown, which is Joyce entering in an absent psychedelic state, the red light district of Dublin, and in the Victorian time, and he's in a world of horrors and fantasy, and people today, they think that psychedelics and psychedelic trips only really came about with Terence McKenna and recently with Graham Hancock and all that nonsense about going down the jungle and getting jungle. Do you ever notice the ones that go down the jungle and get jungle juice, like the ayahuasca? They never change. They all come back saying, I had such an amazing experience. I'm so enlightened. I'm so glad I went down there. And then they still hate Jews. They hate their friends and everything else. Nothing's changed. Yeah, that's always amazed me. But anyway, because psychedelic experiences are not necessarily positive things. Even when you think you're having a positive experience on a psychedelic trip, you're probably having a lie said to you. You're getting the energy lie. And so, actually, there's more honesty probably in a negative psychedelic trip than there is in a positive one. Because a positive one, what you're getting is you're basically getting the Sky Fairy fluffers telling you what you want to hear. When you get the bad trip, you're being told what the score really is. Anyway, in Ulysses, he enters Nighttown and he has all this amazing transformative moment where there's one passage in the beginning of the book where Leopold Bloom is explaining what reincarnation is. Remember, and she's reading a smutty novel called Sweets of Sin. And they had lost their child, and he talks about the transmigration of souls, and then looks at the photograph of his dead child, Rudy. And then this is resolved later on in the novel when Bloom, in an absent psychedelic experience, sees the ghost of his child, Rudy, in an alleyway in near a brothel and then walks in and encounters the young man, Stephen, who becomes the surrogate son, and Bloom becomes the surrogate father. And then the story is beautifully resolved in an almost a chemical way as the two of them walk through the streets of Dublin, having discussions on everything from philosophy to art to economics. They had found Byzantium in a brothel. They hadn't found it in some kind of hippie trippy ashram singing. They had found it in a brothel stoned out of their heads. And that's what Joyce was telling us in his work, and that's what the Jesuits tell their people, that the dark stuff is where you get the answers. So get out there and start reading and watching these old films and studying the old paintings. If you live in a big city, you're going to have a gallery nearby. You go down there and start looking at the paintings. Stop looking at Katy Perry videos. It's time for this movement, or whatever we are, this collective, whatever the hell we are, the awakened people, if we want to call ourselves that, to move beyond the childish part and to move into the real stuff, because we've graduated from school and it's now time to go to college. Now, I'm very interested in, you know me, I'm interested in technology, and I'm interested in how technology and the occult work together. And I'm looking for a document here. You haven't lost me. This is part of the chaos that ensued. Here we go. That ensued before the show started. There's an article on my website called Occult Radio, the Science and the Sorcery. Basically, radio was developed in the early days in order for people to try and contact beings from other worlds, other life forms, ghosts. It was very popular with the spiritualists. And much of the early technology of radio, all analog radio, crystals and that kind of thing, was developed out of this idea to contact the beyond. That brings us back to the story we had at the beginning with the Romanovs. They were using the mystic brought in a radioactive substance, and they were trying to foretell the future. Now, I posted an article on my blog this week called Vintage Conspiracy, and one of the I showed journals and magazines and articles that were basically talking about everything that people think in the conspiracy world is brand new, and it's only just been discovered, showing that it's been going back 100 years. And I posted magazines such as The Realist, the magazine that John Lennon was murdered over. The Realist magazine, because he financed it when I was in deep trouble. A satirical conspiratorial magazine. That's something we need to get back as well. Satire, the power of satire, the weapon of the joke. That's another way we can defend ourselves. The jester spirit, the jester power. But there was also another magazine I showed there called The Electrical Experimenter, which goes back about 120 years. And it was a strange magazine. It was a mixture of electrical hobbyists kind of magazine, building radios, building bits and pieces, and also a kind of a philosophical book about the philosophy and almost the alchemy of radio development. And they had articles not only showing you how to build a shortwave radio, but articles talking about how the radio could be used in the future to read people's minds. But the magazine, more than anything else, it was like a homage to Nikola Tesla. When people say Tesla was unknown, when you hear these new ages going on, Tesla was unknown. He was completely known. He was on the cover of Time magazine as the most famous scientist in the world. This magazine, The Electrical Experimenter, was practically a Bible written in his honor. They even used his Wardenclyffe energy transmitter in Long Island as the masthead for the magazine. They had endless articles about him. He was very well known. He won the contract to build the power station at Niagara Falls, creating alternative current. And that's why AC rules the world today in terms of transmission. Now, they weren't joking when they talked about him being a magician. One of the reasons I studied electronic engineering in school is because I was fascinated by schematics. The schematic drawings of circuits. They look just like magical sigils, especially ones that look like the vacuum tube. And that's what they are, again. It's energy being transferred into material matter. And I found this very interesting little article written by a guy called John Macklin here in Ireland about Tesla, and the article is called, "Was This a Message from Another World?" And it's about this subject of occult radio in the early days. Many of the farmers and ranchers who lived up in the remote uplands of eastern Colorado and wrestled a living from their parched land were convinced that Nikola Tesla was a mad, dangerous, and should be locked up. Even the most charitable thought of him as a misguided eccentric. Today Tesla is revered as a pioneer of electrical engineering, and many of his theories and inventions are still relevant today. But to that rural community of eastern Colorado in 1900, the sooner Tesla disappeared to wherever he came from, the better. Night after night, from his remote farmstead on the edge of the San Juan Mountains, came the acrid flash of lightning and the roar of artificial thunder. Some were convinced he was communicating with the devil, but in fact, the Russian-born scientist, with an impressive string of qualifications and degrees, was making some of the first ever attempts to communicate with other worlds. On a stretch of rising ground, a tower of over 100 feet had been constructed, topped by a large copper ball. By alternating the flow of electrical current through the gigantic coil and passing it through the copper ball, Tesla had succeeded in producing a series of blasts of artificial lightning which apparently lit up the sky for miles around. Tesla was in fact transmitting Morse code, sending out a message which he hoped would be received on equipment more advanced than he could envision by other beings in the solar system. For a month in the summer of 1900, the flashes took place almost every night until finally the law arrived from the town of Durango and told Tesla it was high time he stopped terrorizing everyone in the district, and if he didn't leave of his own free will, he would be legally made to do so. The scientist protested, but in vain. Eventually, he sold the farm and moved to a more academic atmosphere of Philadelphia. The tower was dismantled and sold for a scrap, and Tesla was generally dismissed as a tiresome crank and forgotten. Some 22 years later, in July 1922, scientists at an observatory in Florida made a startling discovery. They had been trying to intercept radio frequencies from space, a laborious business on the primitive equipment of the time, using a device which passed a roll of sensitive paper under a spot of light. The beam was in fact a converted radio signal, which would record changes of frequency on the photographic paper, usually in the form of a few meaningless spidery lines. But during 2 days in July, when the system was operating for 29 hours, something astonishing was revealed. A sequence of faint dots and dashes, which, when examined with a lens, turned out to be the recognizable sequence of Morse code. What could the Morse code be? It remained a mystery for several months until the former colleague of a member of the research team who had worked with Tesla in Colorado was able to supply the information about the message that had been blasted out night after night in the San Juan Mountains. A copy of the message was obtained. It was identical to the one on the Florida Observatory film. The implication to some of the more imaginative experts was obvious. The message had been received by a space civilization and beamed back. Surely it was a hoax. That was the general view until in 1923 radio stations reported they were picking up mysterious signals which appeared to be coming from some point in space. All the signals were the same. Morse code, the letter S, sent in a particular sequence, and this time there was no mistake of the origin. 22 years earlier, Marconi, father of the wireless telegraph, had sent that precise message to a colleague in Newfoundland. Technically, of course, the Marconi signal were far too weak to reach outside the planet. On the other hand, it was argued that there was always a chance that they had been amplified by some electrical freak of nature and spit into space to be picked up by someone or something unknown. Eventually, the scientists discovered that both the Tesla and Marconi messages had turned up again, exactly 22 years after they had first been sent. And that meant that, at least theoretically, they could have been travelled to and returned from stars 11 light years away. In the mysterious void of space, the truth has a habit of being stranger and even more spectacular than the wildest fictions known on Earth. And I would just like to add to that there was once a time before Wi-Fi and wireless and TV and radio and communication signals where our ancestors could pick up messages from beyond much more easily, where telepathy probably was common among native peoples as the bush telegraph, where Native Americans could put their ear to the ground, the scouts, and hear the hooves of horses many, many miles away. We have so much pollution at the moment that it's amazing that we haven't all gone mad. Now, why did that thing come back 22 years later, 11 light years from space? We'll never know. Those messages bounce back, or more likely, did they go into another reality and spool back? Did Tesla, with his experiments, open up another version of reality? Stay tuned, and we'll continue this 2-hour special on the energy wars in the Velocity of Now after the final song, which is the Sisters of Mercy and Marianne. And welcome to the final segment of the Velocity of Now with me, Thomas Sheridan. We will ride over that 15 minutes or so that we missed at the beginning due to the technical problems, so we will still get a full 2-hour show. So thanks for hanging on and listening in big numbers and keeping the show going, and thanks to Neil and Paul and everyone else behind the scene for making it all happen, and all the people carrying the show. And it's really enjoying. I'm really enjoying the show. I'm really enjoying broadcasting this time of night, and I hope you're enjoying it too, wherever you're listening, anywhere in the world. Talking about the synchronicities in the energy wars. You know that song by the Blue Oyster called Veteran of the Psychic Wars? Well, when you start to develop, you do realize it is a psychic war, an energy war, and when you start to develop these this ability to work with synchronicities and this ability to spot the overmind and the current trends, you do see synchronicities more powerfully. And one came in today. Someone sent me a story in Facebook in a private message. Back in December, I think it was back in December 2013, I wrote an article on my blog about Jimmy Savile. Now, as many of you are aware, I've done a lot of research and investigation into Jimmy Savile, and I believe he was a serial killer, far more than a paedophile. And I speculated, that one of the possible murders he committed was of a young girl called Leslie Jo Rimmer in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire back in the 1990s. This first came to me as almost like a hunch. I was standing beside the Rochdale Canal, looking in the water, having a pint, and that water in the Rochdale Canal, it has dark secrets, as many of these canals do, but her body was found in there, and everyone, basically at the time, everyone was a suspect in the murder, except Jimmy Savile, who was living very close by in the car park of a pub. And even the Reverend in the local area, I think it was Reverend Graham Kent, who's a Methodist minister, and other parishioners have been long urging the police to investigate Jimmy Savile in relation to the murder of Leslie Jo Rimmer, but they'd ignored it. And something like 3,000 men were questioned, and Savile wasn't, and yet he was nearby and living in the canal, and was seen making strange trips into the woods around the moors at night, and her body was found in the Rochdale Canal. So today someone sent me a story of something quite disturbing. There seems to be a serial killer at work in Manchester, and the serial killer is dumping the bodies of mostly gay men in the Rochdale Canal in the city. So what that means, well, we hope it means that they find who's ever behind these murders soon, because that's quite frightening. That 60 is a lot of people. That's 60 bodies in recent times they pulled out the Rochdale Canal in Manchester. To me, that sounds like the work of a cult, or it can't be a serial killer on their own. But that's a story we have to, unfortunately, keep an eye out for, because, again, the black waters of canals, they're almost like telephone signals of the underworld. That's how I've always felt about them. They carry transmissions from the dark side. It's all about energy. It really is. And you hear the New Agers and the hippies and all the other types going, it's all about energy, and it's all about loving energy, and it's all about hippie-trippy energy. It's not necessarily. Energy flows in a current. Electrons flow along a circuit because one side of the circuit is negative and one side is positive. If you didn't have a negative and a positive side to an electronic circuit, you could not light up a light bulb. You could not, energize a crystal to receive or transmit a radio signal. You could not make the magnets on a relay move and turn that energy into motion. You have to have the positive and the negative. You need both. A steam locomotive has to have fire through coal, black coal, put into its firebox. That coal is extracted under the ground by human labor, and it's turned into energy. It's all positive and it's all negative, and it's all needed. And we have to, the New Agers, we cannot be looking at what they say and what they do and say, oh, we must think positive thoughts, we must think everything positive, we must think everything hippy-trippy and everything lovey-dovey. We have to acknowledge the dark side too. We have to acknowledge the underside of all this. This is why speaking of this, we have the sun to light us during the day, and we have the moon to light us at night. It's in this ability to throw light upon the darkness and darkness upon the light that we attain wisdom and survival tools. Speaking of the moon, there's a new radio show called The Moon Lodge with Carrie Lee and Kira Young, which starts on. It's going to broadcast every new moon on People's Internet Radio. So check that out, The Moon Lodge. This should be quite interesting. Another synchronicity there. Now, another story that popped up into my consciousness today. It actually was published today. It was from the Raw Story website, and this is a good one because we're going to get a good history thing here, and we're going to get a good again the psychopathic control grid stuff. So this is a good story to see how the energy wars. Not only do the elites have all the weapons, but they have most of the energy as well. Google battles piracy lawsuit over Nazi-themed sex party images. And this is by Reuters. Google Inc. sought on Wednesday to block a lawsuit filed by Max Mosley in the High Court in London over access through its search engines to images of the former motor racing chief taking part in a sex party. Google wants to avoid a legal obligation to monitor and limit the flow of data on the Internet. Mosley, who was present in court, argues the firm is breaching its fundamental rights to privacy by allowing users to access the pictures. The images were first published in 2008 by Rupert Murdoch's now defunct News of the World, which is a notorious newspaper, which said they showed a Nazi-themed orgy. An incendiary story, as Mosley's father, Oswald Mosley, we'll talk about him in a minute, was the British fascist politician in the 1930s. Max Mosley later won £60,000, that's $91,000, in damages from the newspaper after the court ruled the party had no Nazi theme and the story was not in the public interest. Mosley 74 has remained in the public eye in Britain ever since, mainly as a campaigner for privacy rights against media intrusion. That's because the bastard got caught. He launched legal action against... See, that's just like cult leaders. Cult leaders will expose everyone else that they don't like on their websites and everything. But if you go to expose them, they hide behind liars. Look at Scientology, for example. That's how you can always tell a cult. The cults will expose and destroy everyone else's life and reputation, but they will hide their own much worse sins behind liars. And this is a classic example of how the rich do it as well. That's all psychopaths do this. He launched legal action against Google and its British subsidiary last year, seeking damages and asking the court to compel the search engine to prevent any user assessing the sex party images in future. Google's lawyers say it has removed the images from search engines in instances where Mosley has notified the firm of specific search terms being used and has provided detailed location of the images. However, the firm does not wish to go forward and set up a filtering system that would prevent users from accessing the images, arguing that would amount to an obligation to monitor the internet. At the first court hearing in the case, Google's lawyers argued on Wednesday that Mosley's lawsuit should be thrown out because the images had been so widely available for so long they had no realistic expectation of privacy left. They also disputed Mosley's position that Google should be considered a publisher of the images for legal purposes. The court hearing was scheduled to the last 2 days. Judge John Mitting is then expected to rule within the 2 to 4 weeks on whether the case should be thrown out or go to a full trial. Mosley has won similar lawsuits against Google in France and Germany. Now, first of all, you see where this is going? If you have money and power, you're now going to be able to hide your sins on the internet. If you're caught doing anything, you see, this is what's happening here. The Mosley family are stooges for the elites. This is what they are. They always have been. And what's happening here is the Mosleys are going to win this case, and it's going to be a situation where wealthy people who are caught in the most disgusting and debased things will be able to get Google to remove the images, take them down, and other search engines in the interest of protecting privacy. But it can only be done through enormous and expensive and protracted legal proceedings, which only the super rich can afford and the rest of us can't. Again, this is the same kind of idea. They're using the most. Now, I'm going to talk about Mosley in a second, but first I want to talk about these Nazi-themed sex parties. I've seen the photographs. There's prostitutes dressed up in SS uniforms, the usual things. The elites love the Nazi-themed sex parties. They love the Nazi-themed parties in general because they're rubbing it into our faces. There's also a kinky thing as well. They're turned on. You see, there's always been the image going back years now of the female Gestapo or SS officer in the short skirt, the blonde cropped hair combed to the side, torturing the American or British prisoner. We have ways of making you talk. And she's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and then she's putting electrodes to him. This is what all the elites are into. They're into this like S&M Nazi stuff. When I worked down on Wall Street, I heard rumors, which were later proven to be true, that there were brothels operating in the Wall Street area that made all your Nazi fantasies come true. And I was told that you could go to this brothel and you had the whores all dressed up in SS uniforms. They'd beat you, whip you. They'd put you on a little train. And I'm not kidding you. I know this sounds hilarious and sick, but this was what was actually going on. They could put the guy the rich banker on a little train, take him to a little death camp, and then gas him, put him in a room, and then the woman in the fishnet stockings dressed as the SS officer would turn the gas on. That's because these people have so much power that they've never had any hardship in their lives, that the elites, because they've had no hardship, are compensating for the lack of dark side. And that's why they go to these brothels and have these kind of like these S&M parties, because they've never had any suffering in their lives, and they need it because they have not had that energy, where the rest of us have been beaten up in school, given a hard time, had our lives treated like shit, had poverty and so on, but not them. So they seek it out. And so this, you see, remember Prince, what was his name, Harry, showed up at a party dressed in a Nazi uniform. This is, again, they're shoving it in our faces. They're laughing at us. They're laughing at us because they created the Nazis, and they... Now, let's put it this way. If you in your neighborhood put on a Nazi-themed sex party, you'd never work again. And it was found out, you would never work again. Never. Your life would be destroyed. But for them, like Prince Harry and Mosley, they can do it all the time and get away with it. They can have pictures of themselves with whores dressed in SS uniforms, leather SS uniforms. And I often think sometimes there's this fetish within this alternative awakened movement, this Nazi fetish at the moment. I sometimes think that's rooted in that as well. Like, punish us. We've been very bad fruiters. Punish us. I do wonder that sometimes. But I also think a lot of that is rooted in Iranian Secret Service have infiltrated this movement. And anyway, and possibly even the Process Church of the Final Judgment as well. But anyway, Mosley's an interesting character. His father was a leader of the British Fascist Party back in the 1930s. You see, this is rubbing it in our faces, harvesting energy, saying, look what we, the elites, can do and you can't. And this ridiculous lawsuit against Google is all about creating the impetus or the excuse where that shower, the elites, can pay lawyers and vast amounts of money to Google and other companies to have their sins removed from the internet. And so the internet becomes like, just like the elites have always been. They can get up to whatever they want inside their castles, whatever they want inside their secret sex parties, do whatever they want on the internet, and not be held accountable, where the rest of us are totally accountable for it and have to be held up for it and made examples of. So this Max Mosley guy can have a Nazi-themed sex party with prostitutes dressed as SS women in leather, and it's no problem. He gets embarrassment. And Murdoch and all these people, they deliberately publish those pictures in the newspapers for this day, for it to come. I have some of the pictures, I've seen them, and there's no doubt about it. It was a Nazi-themed sex party. There's even one on the New Symbols Media link if you go down there. Now, as it says, Mosley's father was an interesting creature. He was Oswald Mosley, and he was the founder of the British fascist movement. He went to Italy in the 1920s, just not long after Mussolini went into power, and became basically, like all the British elites, like Edward VIII and the rest of them, intoxicated with the idea of fascism. They loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was the ultimate form of socialism for them. The perfect management of the unruly masses. And they reckoned if Mussolini could manage the Italians, fascism could manage anyone. His father, the Rothschilds play a huge part in this, right? I'm going to read to you from a book called, written by a guy called Peter Padfield. It came out last year, Hess, Hitler and Churchill, the real turning point of the Second World War, a secret history. A lot of this was pulled from declassified files. Now, Victor Rothschild, of the same banking dynasty, back then, at the time of Mosley, at Trinity College in Cambridge, he set up something called the Apostate Secret Society. This small group of privileged young men was possessed by dissatisfaction with British society and enthusiasm for communism. So they were super wealthy aristocrats in love with communism. How many times have I spoken about this? How many times have I mentioned to you about Cambridge, the elite, and communism? Okay, this is Peter Padfield's words, not mine. And Rothschild, a supreme rationalist, was drawn to the scientific Marxism they professed. He asked his views by committing to the Labour Party, but two of his friends in the Apostles, Anthony Blunt and Guy Burgess, like Kim Philbin, were later recruited as Soviet agents. The Corsi had no doubt that Rothschild was their sponsor. So here was the Rothschild family sponsoring Soviet agents during the 1930s in order to create a communist Great Britain. So those of you who say the elites were not sponsoring communism, the biggest elites of them all were the Cambridge sect under Victor Rothschild. And a quote from the document, the declassified document says, He saw these brilliant young men at Cambridge, all of whom had a weakness, and he spotted it like a psychopath and put it to advantage, thinking they would get to the higher levels of affairs. You see, these elites at Cambridge knew that there was an elite above the elite, and joining the apostles with Victor Rothschild would get them there. He saw the Nazis as the great threat to the Jewish race, and was determined to back the Russians. He encouraged these men, helped them financially, and successfully secured them and took them back. De Courcy himself was a prime target for Russian groups. A Soviet booklet entitled Russia's Enemies in Britain devoted 39 of its 70 pages to attacking him. Conversely, there is no doubt that he was in position and had contacts to know his own enemies in Britain. More recently, his charges against Rothschild have been confirmed by the Australian author Roland Perry, who has adduced compelling circumstantial evidence, admittedly there is no direct proof, to show that Rothschild himself, Victor Rothschild now, was recruited by the KGB and was actively involved in passing information on to the Russians, mainly through his friends Blunt and Burgess in the Cambridge Apostle Society. In short, he was not merely the sponsor, but he was the fifth man in the Cambridge spy ring of Blunt, Burgess, Philby and Donald MacLean. Perry lays the additional approach that Rothschild was more loyal to his Jewish heritage than the country of his birth. Certainly after the Nazis took power in Germany, Rothschild advanced a great deal of money to the British fascist leader Sir Oswald Mosley. Rothschild was paying both sides of the field. Like, you know, this is what these Rothschilds and these Rockefellers, this is the truth. Victor Rothschild, let me explain this to you in clear terms, right? Oswald Mosley, the guy who was the father of the guy currently implicated in Nazi sex parties, was the leader of the British fascist movement in the 1930s, walking around in his S&M black outfit known as the black shorts. See, the big S&M thing always, blue shorts in Ireland, brown shorts, it's always a thug, beating, kicking, freebooter, S&M kind of repressed homosexual aspect to this fascist Nazism. His group, the British Fascist Party, was funded with vast amounts of money by Victor Rothschild, himself a KGB agent working to bring a Bolshevik Soviet into Britain, all run out of the Apostles Organization at Cambridge universities and stately homes. And when Oswald was at this Nazi sex party with these whores dressed in SS uniforms, what he was really saying to the world is, we can do anything we want. We can be Nazis, we can be Bolsheviks, it doesn't matter. We always stay in power. Not only was Mosley involved in this pro-Nazi Nazification of British society. Why, we don't know. I mean, he would have taken that money from Victor Rothschild, knowing that Victor Rothschild's allegiances would have been towards Bolshevik socialism. Okay, so Oswald could not have been a real Nazi. He was a very good-looking guy, actually, and that was part of the reason he strutted around. He had tremendous sexual magnetism, it was said at the time. Now, there's no way that a baronet, this is what Mosley was, a baronet, a member of the aristocrats, did not know the money was coming from Rothschild. So he had created the British Fascist Union of Fascists, they were called, in order to work one side of the consciousness, while on the other side, the real paymaster, Victor Rothschild and the Cambridge Apostle sect, the five of them, all of them probably KGB, so many of them not Rothschild, but it's quite possible, actually I do believe Rothschild probably was a KGB agent, were working the other side. Now this is not a conspiracy book, this is a book written by, this is a mainstream book I'm reading, by Peter Padfield, Hess, Hitler and the Churchill. This is declassified British government documents. This wasn't channeled for man, this is the real thing. So we have the two sides of them playing the people on both ends, just like the elites and the aristocrats have always done. Just like in my Walpurgis Night novels, I show how the Prussian aristocrats played both sides of the game. Both the Red Spartacus side, by bringing these Soviet Bolsheviks into Munich in 1919, and on the National Socialist side, through people like Hess. The reason why World War II lasted as long as it did is because Churchill refused a peace pact and a peace agreement with Germany in 1940. That's what Hess was all about. That's why he was directly going to the British aristocracy. Churchill himself was put and held in power by Victor Rothschild, who wanted a protracted war because he knew that there was no way Germany could hold out past 1943, something that Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, also came to the conclusion that once Operation Barbarossa had started, it happened too late in the year, the Third Reich was doomed. Victor Rothschild knew that the collapse of the Third Reich would mean that most of Eastern Europe, a sizable proportion of Western Germany, and perhaps Austria, Italy, and parts of France would fall into communism. Where it didn't happen through osmosis of a Soviet invasion, it was forced upon them through funding communist and Bolshevik movements in places such as Greece. And 70, 80 years later, their descendants are having Nazi sex orgies, and the princes are wearing Nazi uniforms at parties. The Queen Mother herself was involved in this as well, as was, I believe, Lord Londonderry, who was a high-ranking British peer. There was in 1940, just before Hess arrived, the British government under Churchill they wasn't under Churchill, I think it might have been under Chamberlain, I'm not sure, the Defence Regulation 18B Act, and they held in an internment camp for a short while Mosley and his wife. When their son Max was born, he was put in a house on the grounds of Holloway Prison. So he wasn't even put in the prison. He was raised in a house, and so his son was born, Max, the guy at the Nazi sex party, was born inside a prison, albeit a country club type prison, for his father's Nazi activities. What's interesting is Lord Londonderry and the Queen Mother, who Adolf Hitler referred to as the most dangerous woman in Europe, were not arrested. But all the low-ranking nobodies, including Lord Ha-Ha William Joyce, swung from the gallows, and others were arrested and interned. But if you were an aristocrat involved in any of these shenanigans, in Victor Rothschild and the Cambridge Five shenanigans, you completely escaped. So then World War I is raging, and you have people to this day still believing they fought against fascism. You had other people calling themselves communism who were standing up for fascism. You had other people who were calling themselves fascists who were standing up against Bolsheviks, and all of them. And it's still going to this day. And you remember that. The next time this new obsession within the alternative movement, this new obsession with validating and kind of, absolving the Third Reich and the Nazis because they stood up against communism. You go back 10 years prior and you'll discover that Victor Rothschild and the Cambridge Five were running both sides of that piece of theatre. You are being duped again. There is no friends of ours in positions of high-ranking power. None. Not one. There never has been, and there probably never will be. It's very, very easy for these people to hide behind their religion. Rothschild will say, to this day, you're saying these things about me because I'm Jewish. No, we're saying these things against you because you're an aristocrat. Your religion means nothing. Just like the religion of the other Cambridge Five, probably all Protestants, means nothing. Lord Ha-Ha William Joyce, he can't hide behind, I'm a Protestant. These people come in all shapes and sizes. They're Jewish, they're Muslim, they're Catholic, they're Christian, they're atheist. They're all against us. That's just a lie. Rothschild's hatred of Germany was understandably based upon the treatment of Jews following the 1934 Munich racial laws, which were disgusting. This is one of the reasons I can't stand Nazis, I can't stand Bolsheviks. They're all bastards on all sides. And ultimately, people with no power of all religions are the ones who suffer. Rothschild didn't see those Jews in Germany as his people. He saw them as a business that he didn't need to lose. He also became aware, possibly in the run-up through communications between the British royals, particularly through Edward VIII, and before Hess's arrival, that the Third Reich's initial plan was either to transfer the Jewish population of Central Europe to either Palestine, to the Palestine Mandate, or to Madagascar, a large island off the coast of East Africa. Rothschild was having none of it, because if that had have happened and the peace agreement had been made, that would have been the end of his Bolshevik socialist dream for Europe. So Lord Victor Rothschild and the Cambridge Five, who were all Protestants now, remember, what they did was they all got together and they kept the war going because they wanted a communistic Bolshevik Europe. And if that meant that 6 million Jews were to be killed in order to facilitate Victor Rothschild's scientific socialism, so be it. He didn't care about them any more than he cared about German Protestants or German Catholics or Polish or Russians or anyone else. He just wanted the Bolsheviks in power. And I'm sure if we go further back, we'll probably find that that bunch were also involved in the removal of the Romanovs. For all we know, the psychic deterioration within the Romanov court that I spoke about at the beginning of the show could have been put in there by agents from these Bolshevik movements in Western Europe, in Britain, in Cambridge, into there. This is why I'm always telling you about Cambridge. People are looking at Bohemian Grove. They're looking at all these things, the crypt at Skull and Bones. And especially English people doing it. They're looking to America. Where you got to really look is Cambridge. Cambridge in England is the black heart of the control grid. All the experiments are run out of there. Do you remember the Schilderberg Festival, the Bilderberg Festival that they had a few years back, where they had all these superstars of poof, were all standing on a stage having a festival while the Bilderbergs went by their way in a hotel in Watford, while everyone was having poof fun and calling it a protest? That was all organised out of Cambridge universities through the usual lab rats. I'm not going to mention their names, but they're the same lab rats that are behind the ultra left-wing parties. It's still going on. Around Cambridge, we have all these US Air Force bases. We have places like Somme, where you had the murder of those two girls. Their bodies found outside the perimeter fence of a US Air Force base, and it's never been fully properly explained. Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley have been blamed. Were they involved? Probably. Were they the only ones involved? Absolutely not. We got a glimpse of a messy mistake. Cambridgeshire is the dark heart of it all. I would actually go as far as saying if you're involved in any kind of activist and you do not get involved in anyone from Cambridge activist circles, because they're descendants of these same people who started World War II and kept it going. Mr. Rothschild's fancy, energy. It's always about energy. Don't let them burn out the filament in your heart and your consciousness. Become a synchronistic, creative, raging atomic fire in your soul and spite them. I'm Thomas Sheridan. This is the Velocity of Now. It's 15th of January 2015. And as we look forward to the future, we have to keep that one face of Janus on the past and watch them and see how their games were played in the past, how they stole our energy in the past, and so they cannot get us again in the future. Get wise, get inquisitive, look at the bigger picture,